Okay, so Cardano is a pension and risk management fund based in the UK and the Netherlands. I've been there for about 6 months, and my role is to move them from an internal, fairly, dare say the word, legacy on video system, which is internal, to a scalable, modern web-based infrastructure and code and practices. And a big part of that is creating an API-driven culture, so that everything we do has an API, and users can self-serve, developers, business people, analysts can all go and get the data themselves. A big part of that, I was going to say a big part of that is GraphQL, but after Jonas's talk, first of all, I'm actually going to start looking at OData. But I might finish my talk anyway since I'm here. So what's the problems we're trying to solve here with GraphQL? So the first one for us, we're not Facebook. We don't have low latency requirements on our servers. No, and they mostly use it from the front end. We don't have that, but what we do have is, if you've ever done REST, as we've all heard many times today, there's 1,000 ways to do REST, and every developer does it their own way, no matter how much documentation you write or how many standards you have. So having that consistency is a big win for us. And so we're using it on the UI and on the service-to-service layer, just to give us that consistency. Also having a schema-driven design, as we talked about many times here. So having a working design, so we write the schema, we get it up and running really quick with some mock data. We have the UI team start working and prove it out. And so before the API team's really written too much code, we've got some feedback from the UI team about whether it's going to work and so on. And the other big one is documentation, which we all love as developers. We love doing that. The options you have is wikis, which is fantastic on the first release, and it's out of date by the time next day. You can do Swagger, which is fantastic. I've used that. But again, it's annotations, so you still have to do a separate step to do your comments, to do your documentation. You can use CodeGen, but to me, that sounds like the tail wagging the dog. You're using CodeGen to write documentation. It seems a bit extreme. Or you can do something like reflection, write your own great reflection code, which is fantastic for getting your promotion because you look really cool. But it's quite complex to do, right? So how do we use GraphQL? So we start off, I apologize if you can't read it, but just assume that's a text schema. Okay. So it's just a schema. It's the IDL that Johannes was showing us. It's fantastic. It's just a text file. And it basically you say, I've got these types, and the fields are these names, and they're these types, and that's it. From there, you can use something like we've been using Apollo, their graph tools, which is fantastic. Within a minute, you've got an Express server running with mock data. They will auto mock your code, and you can see there you get strings and integers and so on. Or a great new tool that pressed the wrong button, that I've just discovered is called GraphQL Faker, which gives you another way of doing it, and it gives you a nice user interface as well, and it does mocking. And that's great. You get up and running. You can deploy this, set it running on your server or whatever, and the UI team can start using it, or locally. But you'll find pretty quickly that it's not really adequate. The data is not really having the word string or hello world. It's not going to really get you very far, so you want something a bit richer. So you can enhance the mocks. With Apollo, you can use something like Casual or Faker to generate more realistic data. Or even your own code, and you get really nice, rich data like this. So again, with very little code, you've got a server, a code that you can deploy and be building against it. GraphQL Faker is another nice little tool. I was actually going to build something called MockQ, which was hence the name of my presentation, but then I found this, which is very similar to what I was going to do, so that's the end of that. But this is great because you have a nice UI that adds to graphical, that you can do context, and you can do auto selection of the field you want to type. So you can say, you can do Control Shift, and you can say, I want a URL or whatever, and automatically saves that in your schema. It saves it as a directive, so it doesn't actually affect your schema. You can still use it in the real code. So the benefit is I can now be mocking my data while the API team's using exactly the same schema file physically, writing the real code. So any changes in one is automatically in the other. So there's not two places to go and do your documentation or your documentation. So that gets me to the last point. So you've released this API, it's going fantastic, everyone loves it, you're doing all these changes, you start adding fields, and your documentation's out of date instantly. Whereas with GraphQL, you have the documentation is built in as the comments in your schema. So developers are fantastic at doing comments, as we all know. And so they will update that more likely than anything else. And so you automatically get documentation. And for us, that's a big win. So I'm conscious I'm running out of time here. But I've got some samples on our GitHub and some blogs about how we've been approaching this. And feel free to ask me questions anytime. Thank you.